little girls under the age of 7, right? And so part of that journey for me was realizing that I was going to be living for more than just me. And yes, I have a 36-year-old son and 11, 8, and 1-year-old grandchildren. But when those little girls were born, it changed something in me. And I say, I have something more than myself to live for. And it was something clicked. And that led to, this, how do I live a balanced existence? And I realized at some point, probably in my late 30s, early 40s, I woke up one day, I was 360 pounds. My doctor had just reached across the table and said, Peter, here's all your diabetes medication and your this medication and your that medication. And she said, congratulations, you've joined the ranks of the unhealthy. And that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Right. And this was long before the girls were born. And I was in an unhappy, unhealthy marriage that we had drifted apart, but we stayed together for all the wrong reasons. But to make myself accountable to somebody, I went to my parents, my then parents, who are still my parents, and God love them, still alive. And I said, look, I need to be accountable to you, and I'm going to make some changes. And number one, I'm going to get healthy. Right? Because if I don't have that, if I'm not around here to see all of it, then what's the sense? But number two, I'm going to get divorced. Number three, I'm going to get remarried. Yep, I don't know to who, but to somebody. And we're going to have kids together. And then I'm going to build a relationship with my estranged son. And then finally, I'm going to figure out what it means to be happy. And I'm going to put myself on that path. And, knock wood, it took a couple of years, many missteps. Like we said, we plan and God smiles. But the truth is that I got there eventually. Fixing the body was the easiest. I tell that in the first part of the book, all of the paths of fixing the body, which we all know, we just have to do them.
And you said you believe in, sorry. You said you believe in, you have to hit that rock bottom, I think you said end of the rope, which is a cliche, but it's true.
Human nature. It seems to be human nature that we're only inspired when we are led as there's nothing left. It is amazing that on death row, many people find God in those final hours, right? Because there's nowhere left for the body to go. There's nowhere left for the self to escape to when you're faced with that immoral moment. Some people's rope is unfortunately, you've got a big far fall. All my traumas in life were little T's. I'm thankful and I'm grateful, but there was a bottom. There was a proverbial bottom. And that you aspire for something greater, right? And what you don't realize when I use the analogy of throwing a bouncing ball in the air. You throw it as high as you can, and you hit big heights. You lose weight, you feel better, you do it. But you know what? It's gravity, baby. It comes crashing back to earth, right? And what you start to realize, and this is where the discovery of spirit was, it's never been about the highs and the lows. You have very little control. And by very little, I mean none. You have no control over any of that, but you're moving forward and you're progressing. And then you realize it's not really like a bouncing ball. You're more like a cork on the ocean. You got an infinite amount of space above you and an infinite amount of space around you, and you're just riding on the turbulence, right? But you know what? If you're just the cork, you don't recognize the turbulence. You just recognize the space of the moment that you're in. And it was that I started to realize that I created all these problems for myself, and I could just as easily uncreate them by making.
So that's a big moment right there. And was there a book that spun you, or you were probably always a science guy? You were an engineer, right?
I am. I'm an engineer by trade, right? So I don't, you don't go to the bathroom when you're without a plan when you're an engineer, right? And so everything was. I like to say that there's 3 tenets, right? We commit. And then I learn, right? And learn it's reading and podcasts and exposure and experience and all of that, but then do, right? Because if you don't have the action, all of that is a waste. So that first is that commitment. I needed to fix my body. And then you start reading. And then in the spirit side and in the mind side, there's been so many influences. Like I said, this Eckhart Tolle was early, Michael Singer was one of the early books reading that. Don DePani, the ex-Hindu priest who wrote The Power of Now, right? Great. Joe Dispenza, Dawson Church, Brunton, the guy who was the godfather to all of those guys, Dawson Church and all of those guys was, Paul Brunton, and right. These were the influential books that I'm like, everybody's saying the same thing. Every major religion is saying the same thing. Divinity within, spirit within, maybe consciousness. And then here was the funny part. I was an engineer, but prior to that, I was a particle physicist who didn't want to become an educator. So I was well versed in the world of quantum physics. And it was at that point that in the journey, when I began to then not just fix my body, not just fix my mind, I started to realize that there was altered states of consciousness through meditation. I've always been a devout meditator, but it wasn't until I started using psychedelics, medicine, in I wouldn't say reluctantly at first, but let's say carefully at first.
Yes.
I began to have experience after experience, and that opened up something else.
Can you say how you took them, or the first journey? Did you do it in darkness?
I'll give you the whole story. So I had already been on the path of fixing the mind, and fixing the mind is an interesting one because to me, there are two pieces in the fixing the mind that I talk about, right? We talk about happiness, but we can't have happiness without unhappiness, right? So there's a duality there, right? And happiness and expectation of being happy all the time, expectations is the big word right there. We have to eliminate the expectations. However, I will put this, we don't have enough awe in our life. There was a great article recently out of Harvard Medical School there. They have that Research Center for Eudaimology, what's the Greek word? Eudaimonia, right? Well-being. And I love their idea that we need to introduce more awe. So I recognize that. I'm like, how do I get more awe in my life? Because we've all had awe-filled moments, right? But I came up with a mathematical model. Part of it was, I'm going to borrow from Jonathan Haidt, the guy who wrote Happiness Hypothesis. And in it, he wrote that happiness is your set point plus your conditions plus your voluntary acts. And I liked that. One, because I'm an engineer, so I love equations, right? And so then Mo Godot, he said, life is the things that happen to you minus your expectations. Well, I'm going to take a little bit of Jonathan and a little bit of Mo, and I'm going to glue it together, and I'm going to say that happiness is really your set point plus your conditions plus your voluntary acts minus expectations. And that to me is really how we achieve